When a king loses a son, the palace was silent. No chants, no horns, no rustling silks echoing in its corridors. Only one sound remained, the weeping of a man who was never meant to weep. Pharaoh stood in the shadows of his chamber, hunched over the small, lifeless form of his son. The boy's skin, once kissed by desert sun, was pale now. His lips parted in frozen breath, his hand still clutching the small carved lion he had never let go. This was the child destined to inherit empire, the prince of Egypt, the promise of dynasty. But no god of Egypt had saved him. Not Ra, not Anubis, not all the idols carved in gold or fear. Only silence, and the echo of a foreign god's final plague. In the homes of Israel, lanterns flickered. Children laughed as they dipped bread into bowls. No cries of death, no mourning mothers, only the aroma of roasted lamb and the scent of hyssop dipped in blood. It was Passover. The Lord had passed over their doors, but not Pharaoh's. How does a king face a god he cannot control? How does a father bury a son he could not protect? He had been warned, time and again, by words, by signs, by rivers turned to blood. But Pharaoh's heart had grown thick, hardened not by disbelief, but by pride. And now, in a night darker than all darkness, he felt what no army, no council, no priest had ever made him feel. Powerless. You see, this is not merely a story about frogs, locusts, or plagues. It is not a battle of Moses versus Pharaoh. It is the collision of two truths, one made of flesh, the other of fire. One throned in marble, the other enthroned in heaven. And in that collision, every soul must choose. Will we let go or be broken? Before the sea was split, before the staff was raised, before Israel marched through the depths of chaos on dry ground, there was this moment. A man, called God by his people, crumpled at the foot of a child's bed. His crown had fallen, his voice, once booming, was now a whisper. Go, leave. And yet, even after the tomb closed, even after the Hebrews marched out in victory, Pharaoh's pride was not done. He would follow. He would chase. One last breath of power, one final act of defiance. Straight into the waters. This is their story. Of defiance and mercy. Of wrath and rescue. Of a God who divides night from day, judgment from grace, and who teaches that even kings must kneel. Whether you've heard this tale 1,000 times, or it is new to your soul, let it speak. Let it remind you that no heart is beyond hardening, but no chain is too strong to be broken. You are invited to walk with us, through rivers of blood, through hail and fire, through silence and song. Witness the hand that lifted a nation. Feel the breath of the whirlwind that shattered pride. Stand in awe at the edge of a sea that made slaves into sons. If these stories stir something in you, a longing, a question, a quiet hope, subscribe, not just to a channel, but to a journey into the ancient pages, where pharaohs fall and the voice of God still whispers through burning bushes. Are you ready? Let's begin. The waters are waiting. But before the sea ever moved, a man stood before a throne holding only a staff and a name. But before the sea ever moved, a man stood before a throne holding only a staff and a name. That man was Moses. Yet before he dared stand before Pharaoh, he stood before fire. Not fire that consumed, but fire that called. It was in the wilderness of Horeb. The sun had long since scorched the stones, and sheep grazed beneath the dry wind. Moses, once prince of Egypt, now herded animals, not men, a shepherd cloaked in dust and exile. And then he saw it. A bush blazing, but not burned, flames alive, yet the leaves remained. He drew closer, and the fire spoke. Moses, Moses. He froze. Not from fear, but from the weight in the voice. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." And in that moment the earth felt older, the wind sacred, the silence. Listening. "I am the God of your fathers," the voice continued, "of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses covered his face. He could not look. "The God of covenant, the God of deliverance, the God who hears. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt," said the Lord. "I have heard their cries. I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them." The words rang like thunder, but what followed shook Moses more. "Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." Moses trembled. He had crossed deserts, survived. Exodus stood under stars that knew the names of men. But he had never heard his own name spoken like this, as destiny. "Who am I?" He whispered, "that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the children of Israel out." But the fire did not flicker. The voice did not relent. "I will be with you. Not armies, not wealth, only presence. And this will be the sign. When you have brought the people out, you will worship God on this mountain." But still Moses doubted. "If they ask me, 'Your name,' what should I say?" And the voice answered with a phrase that split time. "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent you. A name unshaped by history, a being beyond becoming, not past, not future, just present, unyielding, holy." Yet Moses still resisted. "They won't believe me," he said. "They will say, 'The Lord has not appeared to you.'" Then the fire gave signs. "Throw down your staff." He did. It became a serpent. "Now take it by the tail." And when he obeyed, it became wood again. "Put your hand into your cloak." He did. It came out leprous, white as snow. He put it back, and it was restored. If they do not believe the first sign, they may believe the second. And if not, take water from the Nile, pour it on the ground. It will become blood. Still Moses pleaded, "I am slow of speech. I am not eloquent." And God replied, "Who made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with your mouth. I will teach you what to say." But Moses, trembling, begged one last time, "Please, Lord, send someone else." And the Lord's anger burned, not to destroy, but to appoint. "Your brother Aaron speaks well. He is already on his way to meet you. You shall speak to him, and I will be with both your mouths." So Moses took the staff of God in his hand. Not a weapon, a sign. He kissed his wife, gathered his sons, and returned to Egypt. Not as a fugitive, but as a messenger. The bush still burned in his memory. The name still echoed in his breath. "I am." Not a name to wield, but to trust. And with every step toward Pharaoh, Moses carried more than a staff. He carried the fire. The desert gave way to stone. Dust faded beneath the feet of oxen, chariots, and slaves. And the skyline of Egypt rose once more before Moses, unchanged in glory, but heavy with cries. He had left as a fugitive. He returned as a prophet. At his side walked Aaron, his brother, his voice. 2 sons of Levi, 2 men bearing no sword, no seal, no battalion, only the words of the I Am. They entered the court. Columns loomed like mountains carved by human pride. Gold flickered in every shadow. Slaves fanned air perfumed with incense and control. And upon the throne, cloaked in linen and sun, sat Pharaoh. He did not rise. He did not blink. His gaze, sharp, amused, unafraid. Moses stepped forward. Aaron spoke. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." A murmur swept the court. Scribes looked up. Guards shifted. And Pharaoh laughed. "Who is the Lord? He said that I should obey his voice to let Israel go. I do not know this Lord, and I will not let Israel go." His words fell like stone, but Moses did not step back. He repeated the charge. Aaron's voice rang again. Firm, unwavering. The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Let us go 3 days' journey. Or he may strike us with pestilence or sword. Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. You are idle, he sneered. You distract the people with dreams. Back to your burdens. And with a wave of his hand, he turned decree into oppression. No more straw, he commanded the overseers. Let them gather it themselves, but make the same number of bricks. Let their cries grow, so they will forget these lies of deliverance. The people groaned. They cursed Moses. You have made us stink before Pharaoh, they cried. You have given him the sword to kill us. Moses turned his face to heaven. O Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why did you send me? Since I came to Pharaoh, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered them. But the voice returned. Now not from fire, but from silence. Now you shall see what I will do. Pharaoh will drive them out with his own hand. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name I am. I did not make myself fully known to them, but I have heard the groaning of my people, and I remember my covenant. Tell them I will bring you out. I will free you. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and I will take you as my own. Strengthened Moses returned. Again he stood before Pharaoh. And this time he brought signs. Aaron cast down the staff. Before nobles and scribes, the wooden rod struck the stone floor and twisted into a serpent. Gasps filled the hall. Pharaoh's magicians stepped forward. Wise men, charmers, wielders of illusion. They cast down their rods, and theirs too became serpents. But Aaron's serpent moved. It slithered, it circled, and it swallowed the others whole. Wood to serpent, deception to dust. But Pharaoh's heart remained stone. He would not listen. So the Lord said to Moses, Go to the Nile in the morning. Pharaoh will come to bathe. Stand by the riverbank, take the staff, and say, By this you shall know that I am the Lord. I will strike the water of the Nile, and it shall be turned to blood. Moses obeyed. He raised the staff. Aaron stretched out his hand, and the water turned crimson. Fish died. The river stank. Egypt could not drink. But Pharaoh turned away. He returned to his palace, unmoved, unchanged. 7 days passed, the blood remained. And still the people groaned. Still Pharaoh refused. One sign, one serpent, one river of blood. And still the throne held. But heaven was not done. This was only the beginning. The Nile had bled. But Pharaoh's heart did not. So the Lord said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh again. Say to him, Let my people go that they may serve me. If you refuse, I will send frogs over your land. And so they came, from the river, from the ponds, from every wet place. They swarmed, frogs in kitchens, frogs in ovens, frogs beneath pillows and upon plates. The song of the Nile turned to a croak of judgment. Pharaoh summoned Moses. Pray to your God to take them away, he said, and I will let your people go. So Moses prayed. The frogs died. But as the land was cleared, Pharaoh's heart clouded again. He changed his mind. He would not let them go. So the dust of Egypt became lice. From man to beast, they crawled, tiny biting signs of heaven's discontent. The magicians tried, but could not. This is the finger of God, they said. But Pharaoh would not listen. Then came swarms of flies, buzzing, biting, suffocating. But not upon the land of Goshen, where Israel dwelt. There, peace. Here plague. A separation divine. A lesson clear. Pharaoh again summoned Moses. Pray for me, he pleaded. I will let your people go. Just do not go far. But when the flies departed, so did his promise. Then came pestilence, death upon livestock. Cattle, horses, donkeys, they fell across the fields like shadows. Yet in Goshen no beast perished. Still Pharaoh's heart was stone. Then boils, ash tossed into the air by Moses and Aaron became sores on skin, on Egyptians, on magicians. Even the wisest of Pharaoh's court could not stand. Yet still, Pharaoh would not yield. And then the heavens roared. The Lord said, "Let my people go that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues upon your heart." Hail fell from the sky. Not rain, not snow, but fire wrapped in ice. It struck trees, shattered fields, tore linen from rooftops. Only in Goshen, stillness. Pharaoh again cried out. "This time I have sinned," he said. "The Lord is righteous. I and my people are wicked. Pray, and I will let you go." Moses lifted his hands. The hail stopped, but Pharaoh's heart once more turned cold. So came the locusts, darkening the skies, devouring what the hail had left behind. And when Pharaoh pleaded, the Lord sent a strong west wind and carried the locusts into the sea. Still, Pharaoh lied. Then darkness. 3 days. Not cloud, not night, but a blindness that could be felt. Men did not move. Fires gave no warmth. Eyes saw nothing. But in Goshen there was light. At last Pharaoh summoned Moses. "Go, take your people, your women, your children. Only leave your flocks behind." But Moses said no. Not a hoof will be left behind. "We must take all, for we do not know what the Lord will ask." Pharaoh rose from his throne. His voice was low, his eyes fire. "Leave my presence," he hissed. "The day you see my face again, you shall die." Moses turned. "You have spoken truly. I will not see your face again." And so Moses left. But heaven had not yet spoken its final word. There would be one more plague. A plague that would not strike the rivers, nor the skies, nor the skin. But the heart, the firstborn of Egypt, would fall. From the palace to the slave's hut, even the cattle in their stalls. But Israel would be passed over, if they obeyed, if they marked their doors with blood. Judgment was coming, but so was deliverance. And Pharaoh had one final night left to choose. And so the prophet walked away, but heaven had not. In the stillness that followed, no chariot moved, no servant breathed. But something was coming. Not plague, not storm. A silence deeper than the Nile. A night that would not be forgotten. The night Egypt would break. And so the prophet walked away, but heaven had not. In the stillness that followed, no chariot moved, no servant breathed. But something was coming. Not plague, not storm. A silence deeper than the Nile. A night that would not be forgotten. The night Egypt would break. Then the voice of the Lord came again to Moses. "One more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he will let you go. Indeed, he will drive you out altogether." So Moses stood once more before Pharaoh. His eyes did not burn with anger, but sorrow. "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out through Egypt. Every firstborn shall die. From the throne to the slave's bench, even the firstborn of livestock. There will be a cry in Egypt such as has never been, nor ever will be again. But not a dog will bark among the Israelites, not a whisper will be disturbed." So you may know Moses said that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Then Moses turned, and he left the court, burning with grief. Now the Lord spoke again not to Pharaoh, but to his people. "This month shall be for you the beginning of months, the first of your year." And with those words, history was reborn. On the 10th day, each family shall choose a lamb, without blemish, a male 1-year-old. Keep it until the 14th day. Then at twilight you shall slaughter it, and take its blood, and put it on the doorposts and lintels of your homes. Eat the lamb that night roasted over fire, with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. But this was no feast of leisure. You shall eat with your cloak tucked in your sandals, on your staff in hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through Egypt that night, and strike down every firstborn. And when I see the blood on your doors, I will pass over you. No plague will touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. This was not about worth. It was about obedience. Not about being Hebrew, but about being covered. The blood was the difference. The mark was not just a symbol, it was a shield, a holy sign, a covenant in crimson. Moses called the elders. He repeated the command. He warned them, "Do not leave your houses until morning. Stay beneath the blood." And the people listened. They chose the lambs. They prepared the bread. They gathered their children close. Some wept quietly. Some prayed. All waited. And across the city, Pharaoh stood alone. He had dismissed Moses with fury, but now his fingers trembled. No torches were lit. No priests sang. No guards spoke of confidence. Just the stillness of dread. He walked to his son's chamber, watched him sleep. Listened to the breath that rise and fall. The heir of Egypt, a boy wrapped in linen and legacy. But Pharaoh did not know how to wrap him in protection. There were no gods left to call. He looked out the window. The stars offered no answer. Only the moon watched, and it said nothing. Back in Goshen, families whispered over flickering lamps. Children clung to robes. Bread was broken. Bones cracked. And above every doorway, red upon wood, a promise stood. The Lord will pass over. Midnight was near. Not a wind stirred. Not a voice dared speak. Hearts beat heavy. Mothers clutched babies. Fathers held staffs with shaking hands. This was the night of waiting. The night before, everything changed. Midnight fell. Not with thunder, nor with trumpets, but with stillness. Time seemed to hold its breath. The wind hushed its voice. Even the Nile flowed slower. And then it began. A whisper, a rustle, a gasp. A child's breath. Stopped. Then another. Then another. Across Egypt, from marble halls to clay huts, firstborns fell. Not by sword, not by sickness, but by a hand unseen. Heaven had moved. In the palace, Pharaoh was awakened. Not by servants, but by a silence too loud to ignore. He sat up. The lamps flickered. The hallway was empty. No guards, no songs, no sounds, except for a cry. Faint at first, then louder. A scream. Raw, primal, broken. He knew that voice. His wife. He ran. Through corridors once filled with praise, his feet now echoed in dread. The door to the prince's chamber was open. A nurse sat in the corner shaking. No one spoke. No one moved. And there, upon the silken bed, his son. Still, his chest did not rise. His fingers, once wrapped around a lion carved from ivory, now lay open. Pharaoh stepped forward. He touched the boy's face. Cold. Then he knelt. Not in reverence, but in ruin. A king, crushed not by armies, but by grief. He did not weep like a god. He wept like a man. And his cry rose above the city. In the alleys, the fields, the high houses, and the low. Cries followed cries. Each household a funeral. Each corner a lament. Egypt was undone. But in Goshen, a different sound. Soft songs. Whispers of scripture. The crackle of firewood. The quiet chewing of bread. No cries. No death. Just families gathered close beneath doors painted red. The blood had spoken, and judgment had passed by. It was not because they were better, not because they were braver, but because they believed, because they obeyed, because the Lamb had died in their place. This was not deliverance by sword. It was salvation by substitute, by mercy, by a mark. Back in the palace, Pharaoh sat alone. He had buried enemies. He had outlived threats, but he had never faced this. his son, his name, his heir, his hope, now gone. He had mocked Moses, scoffed at signs, dismissed warnings, but the blood of Egypt now soaked the soil, and not a drop had come from battle. The Lord had fought, and Pharaoh had lost. Then came the sound of sandals, a servant trembling. He did not bow. He simply said, "Moses is waiting." Pharaoh rose. He did not dress as king. He did not summon his court. He walked through the city, past wailing mothers, past broken homes, past shadows that would never fade. He found Moses, and in the night beneath stars that refused to blink, he spoke. "Go," his voice hollow. "Take your flocks, your families, your children. Leave. Bless me also." Then Pharaoh turned, not like a ruler, but like a man who had looked into the eyes of God and been undone. Moses did not cheer. He did not boast. He turned to his people. "It is time." And behind him, a nation stirred. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Women folded garments. Men lifted sacks of bread still without leaven. Neighbors came pressed silver and gold into their hands. "Take this," they said, "just go." Even in grief, Egypt feared them, not for who they were, but for who their God was. And as the stars faded, Israel moved, not in chaos, but in order. Tribes gathered, families counted, staffs held high, a procession of hope, of promises remembered, of prophecy fulfilled. And Pharaoh watched from his palace, not as a god, but as a father without a son, a man who had been given 10 chances to let go, and only now understood what it cost to hold on. The stars still clung to the sky, but the horizon began to pale. And with that soft glow, Israel rose. A people once bent under bricks now lifted their faces toward freedom, not as warriors, not as conquerors, but as the chosen, marked not by might, but by mercy. They moved in silence. Fathers carrying children, mothers balancing bundles of dough on shoulders, elders leaning on staffs, whispering blessings as they walked. The very bread they carried had no time to rise. It was flat, simple, unfinished, just like their journey. There was no chaos, only order. Tribes assembled by households, leaders called by name, scribes recorded the count. 600,000 men on foot, not including the women, the children, the aged. A mixed multitude went with them. Some Egyptians, some slaves from other nations, drawn not just by hope, but by the fear of the Lord. And Egypt watched. From rooftops through veils of mourning, the nation saw its slaves depart, with heads lifted high. Some wept, some cursed, some stood in silence. But none could stop them. Pharaoh had commanded it. And Pharaoh was broken. The Israelites carried more than just possessions. They carried bones. The bones of Joseph, who had once said, "God will surely come to you, and you shall carry my bones from here." A promise remembered, a vow fulfilled. Even the dead were going home. The sun rose higher. The sands of Egypt blew behind them. The wilderness opened ahead. It was barren, unwelcoming, untamed. But it was not Egypt. And the Lord went before them, in a pillar of cloud by day to lead, in a pillar of fire by night to light. Not once did the presence leave. Not once did the people walk alone. And as the first day of freedom unfolded, the people asked questions. What now? Where to? How long? But Moses walked steadily, staff in hand, eyes forward. He knew the path was not simple. That freedom was not the end, but the beginning. There would be thirst, hunger, doubt, but they had been delivered, not by their strength, not by their leaders, but by the hand of God. And so they walked, one foot after another, out of slavery, into story. A story that would be told for generations. Of blood on doors, of bread without yeast, of a people who passed through judgment and found mercy. Pharaoh watched from a distance. He heard no more cries in the night. He saw no more slaves in his courts. Only silence and regret. He had let them go. But in his heart, the war was not yet over. His pride, though wounded, still breathed. And pride always chases. But for now, Israel marched free, with lamb in their memory, fire in their sky, and God in their midst. And so they walked, one foot after another, out of slavery, into story, a story still whispered today by every soul longing for freedom. If this journey is stirring something in you, if you've ever felt the weight of chains or the quiet call to follow a fire unseen, stay with us. There is more. Because though they had left Egypt behind, Egypt had not yet left them, and before them waited water. The fire still burned above them, a pillar in the sky, constant comforting alive. But behind them, Pharaoh awakened, not from sleep, but from shame. "What have we done?" he said. "We have let them go, our labor, our strength, our slaves." And in that moment, regret turned to rage. Pride rose again. He summoned his army. 600 chariots, chosen gleaming, horsemen, foot soldiers, commanders hardened by conquest. Trumpets sounded, swords flashed, wheels rolled across dust not yet settled. The might of Egypt raced after shadows. Meanwhile, in the wilderness, Israel marched. Children on shoulders, sheep in tow, songs hummed beneath breath, until someone looked back and saw the cloud, not the one above, but the one rising from behind, a dust cloud, moving fast. Voices rose, cries echoed. The army was coming. Panic spread like fire. "We are trapped," they cried. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the wilderness? To die here, at the edge of the sea?" They turned to Moses, once their deliverer, now their target. Fear makes slaves of the free. But Moses stood still. The staff in his hand did not tremble. The fire above did not fade. And the voice of heaven whispered again, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord." Then Moses spoke, "Do not be afraid. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." Behind them, Pharaoh. Before them, water. But above them, God. And the fire moved. From ahead it shifted behind. A wall of flame and cloud, a veil between Israel and Egypt. To the Egyptians, darkness. To Israel, light. All night it stood, holding back horses, guarding the shaken. A divine pause, a sacred stillness. And then the command came, "Stretch out your hand over the sea." So Moses did. He lifted the staff, held it over the waves, and the wind began, strong, steady, eastward. The sea trembled, waters shook, and then they parted. Walls of water rose left and right. The sea became a road, not muddy, dry, solid beneath sandals, holy beneath feet. Israel moved, step by step, between judgment and mercy, through chaos, safely. And Pharaoh saw. The wall of fire lifted, the path opened, and pride chose to follow. The army surged into the sea, chariots, wheels, whips. But the waters had never been theirs. The night held its breath again. Israel moved, Egypt pursued, but morning was coming. And the God who made the waters was not done. The first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, casting gold upon walls of water. Israel walked forward, their shadows long, their eyes wide. Children clung to mothers, fathers whispered prayers. The sound of sandals on dry seabed echoed like thunder in sacred halls. And above them the walls held firm, blue and trembling, yet unmoving. The sea had obeyed. But behind, chaos. Egypt charged. The fire had lifted, the path had opened, and Pharaoh's pride, unbroken still. Chariots thundered into the gap. Horses snorted, wheels spun, swords flashed. They pursued as if nothing had changed, as if the God who split the sea was not still watching. But the Lord was watching. And he moved. He looked down from the pillar of cloud and fire, and confusion struck the Egyptians. Wheels jammed, axles broke, horses stumbled. "What is this?" they cried. "The Lord fights for them, against us." And for the first time, Pharaoh's army feared. They tried to turn, but the time for retreat was gone. Then came the voice, "Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea." And Moses did. He turned on the far shore, lifted his staff once more, and the winds ceased. The walls collapsed. With a sound that split the sky, the sea returned. Waves roared, foam swallowed, the mighty drowned. Chariots vanished, commanders sank. The pride of Egypt silenced beneath the deep. Israel turned. They saw the sea close. They saw no more pursuers, only waves, only silence, only freedom. And they stood, dry, safe, trembling. They had walked through death and come out living. They had seen judgment, but been passed over. And Moses watched it all. His hand lowered, his shoulders fell, and in his heart a fire still burned, not of wrath, but of worship. On the shore the people gathered. They looked at one another. Fathers embraced sons, mothers wept with joy. A great sigh rose from the thousands. Then a voice, clear, strong, rising like the sun itself. "I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." It was Moses, a song born of dust, of blood, of deliverance. And the people joined him, a chorus of the freed, a hymn for the ages. "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name." Even Miriam, sister of Moses, took her tambourine. She led the women dancing, singing, celebrating. "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." It was not just a song, it was a declaration that death was behind them and promise before them, that the God of their fathers was not only a deliverer, but a warrior, not only a protector, but a king. And Pharaoh was gone, his chariots scattered, his crown swallowed, his voice, once law, now silence. He had tried to follow the people of God through a door not made for him. And the sea, once mercy, became judgment. On the far shore the fire still burned, not behind them, but ahead, leading, calling. And Israel walked forward, from slaves to singers, from ashes to glory, from fear to faith. The sea had closed, the songs had risen, and the people, finally free, looked ahead. But ahead was wilderness. Not gardens, not cities, not the milk and honey they had heard about as children. Just sand, heat, silence, and questions. They had left Egypt. But Egypt had not fully left them. Their hands no longer made bricks, but their hearts still knew fear. Their backs bore no whips, but their minds still remembered the sting. Freedom, it turns out, is heavier than chains. The journey began, step by step, mile by mile. They followed the pillar, by day, cloud, by night, fire. But the road was hard. No wells, no shade, no maps. Just the memory of what was left behind, and the mystery of what lay ahead. 3 days passed, thirst grew, children cried, Animals slowed. Then they saw it. Water. A pool. A promise. They ran, but the water was bitter. It could not be drunk. And the people forgot. They forgot the plagues. They forgot the sea. They forgot the songs. And they grumbled, "What shall we drink?" But Moses did not panic. He prayed. And the Lord showed him a tree. He threw it into the waters, and the bitter turned sweet. A miracle. Small, quiet, but a lesson. That the God who parts seas also purifies puddles. They moved on, and came to Elim. 12 springs, 70 palm trees. Shade, rest, laughter. A taste of what could be, but it would not last. The wilderness was not done. Soon they hungered, and again they grumbled. "We sat by meat pots in Egypt," they said. "We had bread to the full. You've brought us here to die." Moses sighed. Aaron wept. But God answered. That evening, quail. From the sky, falling like mercy, enough for every camp, every mouth. And the next morning, manna. Thin white flakes across the ground. Not bread as they knew, but bread as they needed. They called it, "What is it?" Because wonder is the name of grace. And so it began, a rhythm of provision. Each morning, manna. Each night, quail. Enough for the day. Never more. If gathered too much, it's spoiled. Because faith is learned in portions. And they walked, sometimes trusting, sometimes doubting. They were free, but still learning how to live free. They had crossed the sea, but not yet crossed the self. And in the nights when fires flickered low, parents told stories of blood on doorways, of pillars that moved, of waters that stood like walls. Children listened, eyes wide, hearts quiet, and slowly, a new people began to form. Not slaves, not wanderers, but witnesses of a God who sees, who hears, who stays. The wilderness was not the end. It was the forge. The place where faith was shaped, identity refined, and trust walked step by step. And before them, still ahead, was the promise. Not yet reached, but not forgotten. They had walked far. Through waters, through doubt, through the dry places. But deliverance was not the end. It was the beginning. Because a people can leave slavery and still not know who they are. So the fire led them to a mountain, a place of thunder, a place of voice, a place where heaven would not whisper, but speak. Because the God who rescues also calls. 3 months had passed since Egypt. And the fire, ever faithful, led them to the base of Sinai, a mountain unlike any other, not for its height, not for its rocks, but for what would happen there. This was not a place to pass through. This was a place to stop, to listen, to be remade. Moses climbed, alone, up stone and silence, into cloud and question. And the voice met him, not as fire this time, but as a call. Thus, you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to Egypt, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Moses descended, his face not shining yet, but his heart full. He called the elders. He spoke the words, and the people replied with one voice, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." Then the Lord said, "I will come to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and may believe you forever. But first they must prepare. Consecrate them today and tomorrow. Let them wash their garments. Let them be ready for the 3rd day. For on the 3rd day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." So they washed, they waited, they trembled. And dawn came. The 3rd day, thunder cracked. Lightning split the sky. A trumpet blared, not blown by men, but by heaven. The mountain trembled. Smoke rose from its summit like a furnace, and the people stood still, not in pride, but in awe, not in strength, but in fear. Because when the voice of God descends on stone, the soul knows who is speaking. Moses was called up. Again he climbed, this time through fire. And the Lord said, "Set limits around the mountain. Warn the people. Do not break through. Do not touch, lest they die." This was not cruelty. This was holiness. This was not distance, but protection. The God who saved them was not only their deliverer. He was holy. And then, the voice, not a whisper, not a suggestion, but a sound that shook earth and marrow. Words that etched themselves into time itself. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." The commandments fell like fire, not to burn, but to form. "You shall not make idols. You shall not misuse my name. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet." 10 words, 10 foundations, 10 echoes of the character of the one who spoke. And the people trembled. They saw the fire, heard the thunder, felt the mountain shake. And they said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us lest we die." And Moses answered, "Do not fear. God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, that you may not sin." The fire did not consume. The voice did not destroy. But from that day on, they knew. They were not just a people rescued, they were a people called. Called to covenant, called to holiness, called to walk not only free, but faithful. The fire still lingered, the smoke still rose, but the voice had stilled. And now, the covenant must be sealed. Not just spoken, not just promised, but written in blood. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait. I will give you tablets of stone with the law and commands I have written for their instruction." So Moses rose, and with him, Joshua. He left the elders behind. "If any issue arises," he said, "Aaron and Hur are with you." Then he turned and climbed into cloud, into silence. For 6 days the mountain burned. A cloud covered it like a crown. On the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the fire, and Moses entered. To the people below, the mountain looked like it was being devoured, like fire consuming stone, like heaven touching earth with fury. But Moses did not burn. He stayed there 40 days and nights. And God spoke, not just laws, but design, a sanctuary, a dwelling place. "A tabernacle," said the Lord, "that I may dwell among them." And Moses listened. He wrote. He received not just instruction, but covenant. Meanwhile, below, time passed, and doubt crept in. The people watched the mountain burn and wondered, "Where is Moses? Will he return? Has he died?" And fear whispered. Then pride spoke. "Make us a god," they said to Aaron, "to go before us." And Aaron, weakened, unsure, told them, "Bring me your gold." They brought it, bracelets, earrings, ornaments. And from the fire, a calf, golden, shining, lifeless, but to them, a god. And they said, "This is the God who brought us out of Egypt." They built an altar. They offered sacrifices. They feasted. They danced. A day meant for covenant turned to corruption. On the mountain, God saw, and his voice thundered again. "Go down, Moses, your people whom you brought out of Egypt. They have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly from the way I commanded them. Now, leave me alone that my wrath may burn against them, and I may destroy them." But Moses stood in the gap. He fell to his knees, and he prayed, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power? Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Remember your promise. And the Lord relented. Moses descended, tablets in hand, heart heavy. He saw the calf, the dancing, the betrayal, and his heart broke. He threw the tablets, stone upon stone, and they shattered. Not just law, but covenant, broken before it began. He burned the calf, ground it to powder, scattered it on water, made the people drink. He stood before Aaron. "What have you done?" And Aaron had no answer, only excuses, only fear. Then Moses called, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And the sons of Levi stepped forward. That day discipline returned, order restored. But the ache remained. The next day Moses climbed again. Alone, he prayed again. "Lord, forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out from your book." And the Lord answered, "Whoever has sinned, I will blot out. But now go, lead the people to the place I told you. My angel shall go before you." But Moses longed for more. He had seen God's power. He had heard God's voice. Now, he wanted God's presence. "If your presence does not go with us," he said, "do not bring us up from here." And the Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses asked one more thing, "Show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, but you cannot see my face. No man shall see me and live. But there is a place near me, a rock. I will hide you there and cover you with my hand. And when I pass by, you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." And so the covenant would continue, not because the people were faithful, but because God was. Not because they remembered him, but because he remembered them, and sealed the promise, not just in fire, but in mercy. And so Moses returned to the mountain. The fire had not faded, the cloud still covered. But this time, he came not only as prophet, but as intercessor, a friend of God. The Lord said to him, "Cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up in the morning. No one shall come with you, no flocks, no herds, only you." So Moses rose early. He carried the stone. He climbed alone. The mountain waited. Then the Lord descended in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, not as thunder, not as fire, but as words of mercy. The Lord a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping covenant to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty. And Moses bowed, face to the ground. And he said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, let the Lord go in the midst of us. For it is a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance." And the Lord said, "I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do wonders never before done in any nation. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out nations before you. You shall tear down their altars, break their pillars, cut down their idols. For you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." And Moses stayed there 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat, he did not drink. He received the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments, written again by the hand of God. And when he came down, his face shone, unseen by him, but visible to all. Light clung to his skin. Glory etched into flesh, so bright, the people were afraid to come near. So Moses veiled his face. He would speak with them, then cover himself again. Because when a man stands in the presence of the Lord, he is never the same. And Israel saw, not just law, not just fire, but grace and glory and covenant renewed. The mountain faded into the distance, but its voice remained. in tablets, in memory, in blood. This was no longer the story of slaves. This was the story of a nation, a people shaped not by power, but by presence. And perhaps you too have wandered. Perhaps your heart, like theirs, has known both deliverance and failure. But the God who called them still calls today, and his covenant is not broken. If this journey speaks to something within you, stay with us. Because what happened next was not the end of the wilderness, but the beginning of the battle. And if this story of wilderness, of covenant, of a God who stays, has stirred something in you, then let it linger. Like this video, if it made you pause. Subscribe if you feel the journey still calls. And share it with someone who might be standing at their own mountain. Because Israel's story was far from over. They had received the law. They had seen the glory. They had heard the voice. But now, they would see the land. And before them stood giants. They were close. So close they could taste it. The wind had changed. The scent of the land ahead carried promise. Figs, pomegranates, olives. Not imagined, not whispered in dreams. Real. The land that had been sworn to Abraham. The land flowing with milk and honey. Canaan. It was before them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe send a leader. So 12 were chosen, one from each tribe, names known, men respected. Among them, Joshua son of Nun, and Caleb son of Jephunneh. They entered the land, quiet, watching, measuring. For 40 days they moved from hill to valley, from field to fortress. They saw harvests heavy on branches, cities built strong with stone, and people tall. Giants, some said, descendants of Anak, men who made others feel small, insignificant, like grasshoppers. Still they gathered proof. A cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry. Figs, pomegranates, the bounty of promise. And they returned. The camp stirred as they approached. Voices rose. Children ran. What did you see? Is it as rich as they say? Will we finally be home? And the spies stood before the people and spoke. We went into the land. It flows with milk and honey just as the Lord said. Look, this is its fruit. A cheer went up. Smiles, hope, tears of longing. But then, a change, a tone. But the people there are strong. The cities, fortified, massive. And the descendants of Anak are there. We are not able to go up. They are stronger than we. And the cheer turned to silence. Whispers crept in. Eyes dropped, hands clenched. Doubt, like a fog, settled over the camp. They are giants, one said. We are but grasshoppers in their eyes. And the people began to tremble. Again. But then, Caleb stepped forward. He raised his voice above the fear. Let us go up at once, he said. We can take the land, for we are well able. But his words were drowned by dread. The 10 persisted. The land devours its inhabitants. All the people we saw were of great stature. We cannot fight them. And the promise, once so near, now felt far. Not because the land changed, but because their hearts did. That night, no one slept. Children cried, women packed, men argued in hushed tones. They had seen the land. They had seen its fruit. They had touched the promise. But they forgot who brought them there. They remembered Egypt more clearly than they remembered God. And as dawn approached, a decision had to be made. Not about the giants, but about trust. And the people cried out, not in worship, not in prayer, but in rebellion. All the congregation lifted up their voices and wept through the night. They wept not for sin, but for fear. If only we had died in Egypt, they said, or in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword? our wives, our children, taken as prey. Let us choose a new leader, they said, and go back to Egypt. Back to chains, back to bricks, back to bondage. The people who had walked through parted seas, who had tasted manna from heaven, forgot and chose slavery again. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the congregation, and Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes. They cried out, "The land we passed through, it is exceedingly good. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us in. Do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us." But the people would not hear. They reached for stones to silence those who spoke faith. And then the glory of the Lord appeared, bright, blinding, burning. At the tent of meeting he came down, and he spoke to Moses, "How long will this people despise me? How long will they refuse to believe in spite of all the signs I've done? I will strike them, I will disinherit them, and make of you a greater nation." But Moses stood again, as he had on the mountain, as he had at the sea. He stood for the people. "Lord," he said, "the Egyptians will hear of it. They will say, 'You were not able to bring your people into the land you promised.' Now I pray, let the power of the Lord be great. Forgive this people as you have from Egypt until now." And the Lord said, "I have pardoned according to your word. But as I live, none of the men who saw my glory and miracles, who tested me 10 times, shall see the land I swore to their fathers. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, him I will bring in, and his children shall possess it." Then the Lord spoke again, "Tell them this, as surely as I live, what they have spoken shall come upon them. Their bodies will fall in this wilderness, all of them, 20 years and older, numbered in the census. Not one shall enter the land, except Caleb and Joshua. For 40 days they spied out the land. For every day they shall wander a year, 40 years, until this generation is gone." And the people heard, and they mourned, but not in repentance, in regret. And the sorrow that follows rebellion cannot undo its cost. Then in pride some said, "We will go up now, we will fight. We have sinned, but we will make it right." But Moses said, "Do not go. The Lord is not with you. You will fall by the sword." Still they went, armed, determined, alone. And the Amalekites came, and the Canaanites rose, and they fell, struck down on the edge of the promise, not because God failed, but because they would not wait for his timing. The cry of rebellion had become the echo of judgment, and the journey turned back into the wilderness. And so the people turned, not into the land of promise, but back into the wilderness. Their feet dragged, their eyes lowered. Behind them, a border never crossed. Before them, years unnumbered. And a silence more terrible than thunder. This was not exile, it was consequence. Not abandonment, but discipline. Because the Lord had spoken, and his word does not return void. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And still they wandered. Around the same rocks. Past the same sand. Beneath the same sun. The generation that would not believe began to vanish. One by one. Some cried in secret. Some hardened their hearts. Some told their children stories of grapes the size of fists of walls that reached the sky of fear that turned a nation back. And the children listened. With wonder, with sorrow, with hope. Because the promise was not dead. Just waiting, but not all had learned. One day a man gathered sticks on the Sabbath, and the people asked, "What should be done?" And the Lord said, "Stone him, not for the wood, but for the heart. Because rebellion in the wilderness grows quickly if not cut." Another day a man named Korah, a Levite, stood up. He gathered others, 250 leaders, and they said to Moses, "You take too much upon yourself. All the congregation is holy. Why do you exalt yourselves above us? It was jealousy, masked as justice, ambition, dressed as zeal. And Moses fell on his face. Then he said, "Tomorrow, the Lord will show who is his. Let each man bring his censer." The next day they came, censers in hand, hearts proud, eyes high. And the Lord came too. The ground beneath Korah split open, swallowed him alive, his family, his tents. Fire fell from heaven and consumed the rest. Silence followed, but only for a moment. The people cried out again, "You have killed the Lord's people," and a plague began. Thousands died until Aaron stood between the living and the dead, censer in hand. Still they wandered, through discipline, through loss, but also through mercy. Their clothes did not wear out, their feet did not swell. Water came from rock. Manna still fell. The pillar still moved, cloud by day, fire by night. They were judged, but not forsaken. And as the years turned, a new generation grew, born in tents, raised under stars. They had never seen Egypt, never crossed the sea, but they had heard. They had learned what fear had cost, what faith could gain. And one day the Lord spoke again, "Turn north, pass through the land of your brothers." And the people moved, not aimless, not hopeless, but toward the edge of promise. Again. But not all who began the journey would finish it. Even Moses was nearing the end. They had wandered long. A generation had faded. A new one had risen. And the land was near. But not for all. Not for the one who had parted seas, stood before kings, spoken with God face to face. Because even Moses, the servant, the prophet, the friend, had faltered. And now, he would climb one last mountain, not to lead, but to look. The camp was still, the morning gentle, and Moses stood apart. He had led them through fire, through fear, through 40 years of wilderness. But now he would walk alone. The Lord spoke to him, "Go up this mountain of Abarim, Mount Nebo. There you shall see the land I am giving to the people of Israel, and there you shall die." No bitterness, no protest, just silence and obedience. Because Moses knew the journey was never his to finish, only to begin. So he climbed, step by step, stone after stone. The wind whispered through gray beard and weathered cloak. He passed no armies, no pillars of fire, only memory of reeds and river, of a basket, of a voice from the bush. He remembered Egypt, the palace, the rage, the murder. He remembered Midian, the sheep, the silence, the mountain. He remembered Sinai, the fire, the commandments, the trembling people. And he remembered the rebellion, the rock, the moment his faith slipped into frustration. And the Lord had said, "You shall not bring this assembly into the land." Still he climbed, not with regret, but with reverence. Because even in judgment, there was grace. At the summit, the Lord showed him the land, all of it. Naphtali, Ephraim, Judah, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, even to the far hills of Zoar, a sight no man had seen. And the Lord said, "This is the land I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over." And Moses looked. He did not weep, because the promise was true. Even if he would not walk it, the people would. And that was enough. Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there, in the land of Moab, just as the Lord had said. He was 120 years old. His eyes were undimmed, his strength unbroken. And the Lord himself buried him in a valley hidden. No man knows the place to this day, because some things belong to God alone. And Israel wept for 30 days in the plains of Moab. They wept not just for a leader, but for a father, a shepherd, a voice that had echoed with God's own. But even grief must give way to purpose, because the land waited. The giant still stood, and a new voice would rise. The mountain stood quiet. Moses was gone, but his voice still echoed. In commandments, in memories, in the souls of a people once lost, now nearly home. But home needed a leader, a warrior, a listener, a man who had walked in shadows and now must step into the fire. Joshua, son of Nun, servant of Moses. One of the two who had not feared the giants, a man who had seen walls and believed they could fall. And the Lord spoke, "Moses, my servant is dead. Now therefore arise. Go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land I am giving to them." No hesitation, no debate. The Lord knew the weight of grief, but the call must continue. And to Joshua he said, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous." 3 times he said it, not because Joshua was weak, but because courage is never born once. It must be spoken into being, and spoken again. Only be strong and very courageous. Do not turn from my law to the right or to the left. Meditate on it day and night. Then you will make your way prosperous. Then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you, wherever you go. And Joshua stood, not as Moses, but as himself, not with tablets, but with trust, not with thunder, but with obedience. And the people saw him, and they answered, "All that you command us, we will do. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses." And the journey moved forward, but not without reminder. Before they crossed, Joshua sent 2 men into the land, into Jericho. And there they met a woman, Rahab, a harlot, a sinner, but also a believer. "I know the Lord has given you this land," she said. "We have heard what he did in Egypt. Our hearts melted. Swear to me by the Lord that you will spare my family, because I have shown you kindness." And the spies said, "When we come, hang this scarlet cord from your window, and all within your house will be spared." Faith from the mouth of a Canaanite. Mercy on the edge of judgment. Even now the Lord was gathering a people from every place. Even now the promise was widening. And Joshua returned to the camp, his eyes fixed, his spirit stirred. Because what lay ahead was not just war, it was fulfillment. And he, the servant turned leader, was ready. The sun rose, and before them a river, not wide, but swollen. It was harvest season. The Jordan overflowed its banks. And yet, the command came. Cross, not build, not wait. Step in. Because faith does not always come after the waters part. Sometimes it walks first. Joshua rose early. He called the priests. "Take the ark of the covenant and go before the people, not to lead by sword, but by presence, because the God who parted the sea still went before them." Then Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And the next day they moved. The priests carried the ark. The people followed, not running, not rushing, step by step toward water. And when the soles of the priests' feet touched the edge of the Jordan, the waters stood still. Far upstream, they stopped flowing, and the riverbed dry. The priests stood in the middle of the river, holding the ark. And all Israel passed through, not muddy, not fearful, but sure, because presence was in the midst. When all had crossed, the Lord spoke again. "Choose 12 men, 1 from each tribe. Tell them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from where the priests stood. Carry them over and place them where you camp tonight." So they did. 12 stones, heavy, sacred, carried on shoulders, carried in memory. And there, at Gilgal, they placed them, a monument, not to strength, but to remembrance. Joshua said, "When your children ask, 'What do these stones mean?' you shall say, 'The Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before us, as he did at the Red Sea, that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord forever.' And when the priests stepped out of the river, the waters returned. The river flowed, the path closed, and the people stood in a new land, not in fear, but in awe. They had buried Moses, they had crossed the Jordan, they had placed the stones, and now they were no longer wanderers. They were home. They had crossed, they had remembered, they had stepped into the land. But how do walls fall when no stone is thrown? How does a fortress collapse under silence? And why would God ask his people to walk in circles for 7 days, unless the battle was never about bricks and gates, but about trust? Jericho stood tall, its walls thick, its gates barred, its warriors ready. A city built for siege, a fortress carved for fear. And before it stood a people with no ladders, no siege towers, no battering rams, only feet and faith. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hands, its king and its mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, once each day for 6 days. 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets before the ark. On the 7th day march 7 times. Then the priests shall blow the trumpets, and the people shall shout, and the wall will fall down flat. No military strategy, no secret tunnels, just walking and waiting. Because sometimes obedience looks like circling, and faith sounds like silence." Joshua called the priests. "Take up the ark of the covenant. Let 7 of you carry trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord." Then he spoke to the people, "Advance. March around the city. Let the armed men go ahead of the ark." And to the rest he said, "Do not shout. Do not speak. Not a word from your mouths until the day I tell you to shout." And they marched. 1 circle. No noise, no weapons drawn. Only footsteps and horns and the ark. The city watched from above, mocking, scoffing, confused. But the people kept walking. Day 2. Another circle. No change, no cracks, only dust and discipline. Day 3, then 4. Still nothing. And yet, they marched. Because faith isn't proven by how fast the walls fall, but by how long you're willing to walk before they do. Day 5, then 6. Circles upon circles. Each one a defiance of reason. Each one a statement of surrender. Because Jericho was never about stone. It was about submission. Then came day 7, and the people rose, early, before the sun, not to rest, but to circle again. 7 times, 7 laps, around a city that still stood, still mocked, still loomed. But this time, they would not stop. 1 lap, then 2, then 3. Still quiet. 4, 5, 6. The city braced, the soldiers laughed. Then came the 7th, and Joshua raised his voice. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The priests blew the trumpets, long, loud, wild, and the people shouted, with breath long held, with hearts full. A cry, not of victory, but of trust. A cry of obedience finally released. And the walls fell, not brick by brick, but flat, as if heaven pressed them down. They rushed in, not like raiders, but like witnesses. The city was theirs, because it was never theirs to take, only to trust for. And Rahab, the harlot, the believer, was saved. Her scarlet cord still hung from the window, and all within were spared, because mercy never forgets. The dust had barely settled. The walls lay broken, the gates splintered, the once proud towers of Jericho reduced to rubble. But not all rubble is lifeless. Some of it remembers, and some should never be touched. Joshua stood before the people. He looked at the ruins, then raised his voice, and he said, "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest shall he set up its gates." A solemn silence fell, because not all victories are meant to be repeated. Some doors, once broken, must stay shut. The people moved on, not with shouting but with reverence, because they had not conquered a city. They had witnessed a miracle, and miracles leave marks. But not all hearts were satisfied. Among the spoils, gold glinted, silver shone. A cloak, Babylonian rare, woven with pride. And one man reached. His name was Achan, from the tribe of Judah, respected, trusted. But in secret he took, he hid, he buried. Beneath his tent, beneath his soul, he thought no one saw. But the ground does not forget, and neither does God. The next city, Ai, small, unfortified. Joshua sent men. "Go up and spy out the land," he said. And they returned. "Do not send all the people. 2,000 or 3,000 are enough." Confident, casual, unaware, they went up, and they fled. Struck down, humiliated, defeated, 36 died, and the hearts of the people melted. Like water, Joshua tore his clothes. He fell to the ground before the ark, and cried, "Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought us across the Jordan only to deliver us into the hands of our enemies? What will you do for your great name?" And the Lord answered, "Get up. Israel has sinned. They have taken what was devoted. They have stolen, lied, hidden. I will not be with you unless you destroy the devoted things from among you." The next day tribes were brought forward, then clans, then households, then men, until Achan stood, alone. And Joshua said, "My son, give glory to the Lord. Tell me what you have done." And Achan said, "I saw among the spoil a beautiful cloak from Shinar, 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold. I coveted. I took. I hid them beneath my tent, and they went, and they found, just as he said." Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, and his sons, and daughters, and livestock, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. And they stoned them, and burned them, and raised over them a great heap of stones. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger, and the valley was named Achor, trouble, because sin, even in a land of promise, still demands judgment. The fall of Jericho was not just about walls. It was about hearts. And what you choose to carry after the victory may matter more than how you won it. The ashes cooled. The stones stood. The camp grew still. And from that silence, a name was remembered. Rahab, not because of her past, but because of her choice. She had opened her door to strangers. She had hidden them at the risk of her life. She had spoken words of faith long before walls fell. "I know your God," she had said. "He is God in the heavens above and on the earth below." And she was saved. Not just spared, but grafted into Israel, into the covenant, into the very line that would one day bear the name of salvation, Yeshua. Jesus. Because faith has no bloodline, and mercy has no boundary. Rahab the harlot became Rahab the mother, mother of Boaz, grandmother of kings, named in the genealogy of Christ. Because God remembers not what you were, but what you chose to trust. The walls of Jericho fell, but one window stayed open, and through it, a scarlet thread, a sign of hope, a shadow of a cross. This is not just a story of conquest, it is a story of conversion, of inclusion, of invitation. Because even in judgment, there is always a way through. If this part of the journey spoke something deep into you, if you felt the weight of trust, the danger of disobedience, or the wonder of being remembered, then like this video. Subscribe if you're walking this path with us. Share it with someone who needs to know that mercy can find them too. The walls had fallen, the scarlet thread had held, and the land began to open, but not without resistance. Because when one city falls, others rise in fear. And when God fights for his people, even the sun must learn to wait. Jericho had fallen, not just physically, but spiritually. The news spread like fire, and fear rode with it. In the hill country and the lowlands, on the coasts and mountains, kings heard, and kings trembled, because this was not a nation that fought alone. This was a people carried by presence, a people whose God had dried seas and collapsed walls. So 5 kings gathered, of the Amorites: Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, each with armies, each with pride, and all with fear. They looked not to Israel, but to a smaller target, Gibeon, because Gibeon had surrendered, not by sword, but by treaty. Days earlier, the Gibeonites had come, with worn-out clothes, moldy bread, empty wineskins. And they said to Joshua, "We come from a distant country. Make a covenant with us." And Joshua believed. He did not ask the Lord. He did not wait. He made peace and swore by the Lord to let them live. Then the truth came. Gibeon was near, not distant. But the oath stood, and Israel honored it. Now, because of that peace, Gibeon was surrounded. 5 kings, 5 armies, 1 city. They sent word to Joshua, "Come quickly, help us. Do not abandon your servants." And Joshua moved. He took all his men of war, all the mighty warriors. And the Lord said, "Do not fear them. I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you." So Joshua marched all night, from Gilgal to Gibeon. And at dawn, he struck. Panic spread, confusion ruled. The Amorite kings, overwhelmed. Their soldiers, scattered. Then the Lord threw hailstones from heaven, large, relentless, deadly. And more died by hail than by sword. Because when God fights, nature listens. But the day was not done. Joshua saw the enemy still fleeing, and he cried, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon. Moon in the valley of Aijalon." And it did. The sun stopped, the moon stayed, until the nation had taken vengeance on its enemies. There has been no day like it, before or since, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man. Because the Lord fought for Israel. The sun stood still, but the kings did not. They ran, not to fight, but to hide. 5 kings, once proud, now hunted. They fled across the hills, down rocky paths, into shadows. And there, they found a cave at Makkedah. They slipped inside, hearts pounding, crowns trembling. Stone became their shield, darkness their hope. But the light found them. And word came to Joshua, "The 5 kings are hidden in the cave at Makkedah." And Joshua said, "Roll large stones against the mouth of the cave. Set men to guard it. But do not stop. Pursue your enemies. Strike their rear guard. Do not let them reach their cities. For the Lord your God has given them into your hand." So the army pressed on, relentless, swift. And when the battle ended, when the sword rested, they returned to the cave, to the kings, to judgment. Then Joshua said, "Open the cave." And they brought out the 5 kings, Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, bound, beaten, silent. Then Joshua called his commanders. "Come near. Put your feet on the necks of these kings." And they came, not with pride, but in obedience. Because this act was not about domination. It was a declaration, a sign to a people once enslaved, that no throne stood above God. Then Joshua said, "Do not be afraid, do not be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight." And he struck them and put them to death. And he hung them on 5 trees until evening. At sunset they took them down. They threw their bodies into the cave, the same cave they had chosen for safety, and they sealed it with great stones, still there to this day, because the grave we run to in fear often becomes the judgment we cannot escape. Israel did not seek war, but they did not turn from it. Because peace without truth is just a pause before ruin, and truth sometimes wears armor. The 5 kings were gone, their armies scattered, their cities shaken, but the land was not yet still. Joshua moved on, city by city, stronghold by stronghold. Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, Debir. Each one fell, not by might alone, but by obedience. And the Lord delivered them all. He hardened hearts. He stirred panic. Because this was not conquest, it was cleansing. Not expansion, but fulfillment. From Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, from Goshen to Gibeon, Joshua struck all the land. The hill country, the Negev, the lowland, the slopes. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. And the land rested from war. But not all wars are won with swords. Some take root in silence. And even as Joshua fought without, the people would soon face what still lurked within. Because possession is not the same as purity, and dwelling is not the same as devotion. Yet for now, there was peace, hard-earned, God-given. A peace not born of treaties, but of trust. A rest not offered by kings, but by a king. And Joshua stood at the center of it all. The leader who had seen giants fall. The warrior who had watched the sun stop. The servant who had never forgotten that the land was a gift. Not to be earned, but to be honored. And so, with battles behind him and inheritance before him, he prepared to divide what had been won. The battles had ended. The kings were no more, and the land lay quiet. But peace brings its own test, because when the sword is sheathed, the heart must choose. How do you divide a gift without breaking unity? How do you settle into rest without drifting from reverence? The land was theirs, but so was the responsibility. And now they would draw the lines. The land had rest from war, but not from wonder. Because now the gift must be divided, not as plunder, but as promise, not with sword, but with trust. And so the elders gathered, Joshua, Eleazar the priest, the heads of tribes, the scrolls of Moses beside them, the tabernacle standing at Shiloh. The cloud no longer moved, but the covenant did. Because the journey was never just about reaching the land, but learning how to live upon it. The Lord had spoken, "Divide the land for an inheritance, to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh, as I commanded Moses." And Joshua obeyed, not as a general, but as a steward. He stood not with spear, but with reverence. Because the ground beneath their feet was not just earth, it was gift. It was grace measured in miles. So they began. They cast lots before the Lord, not to gamble, but to trust. Because in the sacred casting, chance became calling. Judah was first, the lion tribe, the lineage of kings, their portion the south, fields of Hebron, caves of giants, wilderness edges and promises kept. Then came Ephraim and the western half of Manasseh, sons of Joseph, Born in Egypt, now rooted in Canaan. Their land stretched wide valleys and fortified cities, forests that still needed clearing. Tribe by tribe, the lots fell. Benjamin, between Judah and Ephraim. A slender corridor, a prophetic bridge between kingdoms yet to rise. Zebulun by the sea. Issachar in fertile plains. Naphtali along the northern heights. Asher hugging the coast. Dan to the west, though their hold would tremble in time. Each name tied to a territory, each boundary etched into memory. But it was not about maps. It was about identity. Because the land was not random. It was relational, a reflection of covenant, a response to obedience, a root system for a people once rootless. And then there were the Levites, set apart, scattered. 48 cities among the tribes. No inheritance, no single place to claim. Because the Lord had said, "They shall have no portion among their brothers. I am their portion." And so Levi lived in the midst, among Judah, among Ephraim, among Naphtali. Their presence a reminder that every tribe must remain tethered to worship, that no boundary should become a wall against reverence. This was not land ownership, this was spiritual architecture. Because God was drawing a map of memory, and every town, every valley, every river was a reminder of a voice heard at Sinai, a lamb slain at Passover, a sea split in wrath and mercy. But even now some tribes hesitated. 7 had not yet claimed. Their feet stood on promised ground, but their hearts remained unsettled. And Joshua said, "How long will you wait to take possession of the land the Lord has given you? Select 3 men from each tribe. Go, walk the land, describe it in writing. Then return to me, and I will divide it by lot before the Lord here at Shiloh." So they went. They mapped hills and streams, groves and ruins. Not to conquer, but to understand. Not to measure value, but to trace blessing. And they returned, and the rest of the land was assigned. Then came the last act. The tabernacle stood at the center. The people surrounded it. 12 tribes, 12 territories. One calling, not to simply live, but to remember that the land was not theirs by conquest, but by covenant. That every boundary was also a reminder of the one who gave it. And so the inheritance began, not with shouting, not with war, but with silence and awe. Because sometimes the most sacred battles happen not in the taking, but in the keeping. In the midst of the drawing lots, one voice rose, old, steady, familiar. Caleb, son of Jephunneh, of the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 who had spied the land, and one of only 2 who had believed. He stepped forward, not to claim, but to remember. He said to Joshua, "You know what the Lord said to Moses concerning you and me at Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses sent me to spy out the land, and I brought back word as it was in my heart. But the others, they made the hearts of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord." He paused, not out of pride, but out of awe, because time had only deepened his faith. Caleb continued, "And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive these 45 years. Ever since that day he spoke to Moses, and now I am 85 years old. Yet I am still as strong today as I was then, for war, for going out and coming in." Then he lifted his eyes to the hills, to the giants, to Hebron, and said, "Give me this mountain, the one the Lord promised me. You heard it that day. The Anakim are there, great cities, fortified heights. But if the Lord is with me, I will drive them out." There was no tremble in his voice, only fire. Because faith, real faith, doesn't age. It endures, it waits, it climbs. And Joshua blessed him. He gave Caleb the hill country of Hebron, not as a favor, but as fulfillment. So Hebron became his inheritance, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Hebron, once called Kiriath Arba, the city of Arba, father of giants. Now, the city of a man who trusted more in God than in size. And Caleb drove them out. The Anakim, the high walls, the deep-rooted fears. He took the mountain not because it was easy, but because it was promised, and the land rested. But the story of Caleb was not just about courage. It was about memory, because faith that forgets will fail, but faith that remembers will rise, even when knees grow weak, even when years grow long. Caleb remembered. He remembered the grapes of Eshcol, the murmurs in the camp, the fire on Moses' face, the edge of rebellion, the silence of judgment. And still, he held the promise. He kept it like a sealed scroll in his soul. And when the time came, he opened it and claimed it. "Give me this mountain." The words still echo, not as ambition, but as devotion. Because mountains are not conquered with muscle, but with memory, with trust, and waiting. The land had been given. Mountains and valleys, wells and vineyards, towns with walls, fields with history. And yet, God's presence chose canvas over castle. At Shiloh, the people pitched the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, the same structure that had stood at Sinai, that had wandered the wilderness, that had been taken down, carried, and rebuilt, again and again. Now, it stood still, in the heart of the promised land. It was not grand, not stone, no pillars of cedar, no golden dome, just curtains, hooks, acacia wood, threads of blue-purple scarlet. But it was enough, because what made it sacred was not its shape, but its presence. The ark was there, the altar, the lampstand, and above it all, a memory of fire, a whisper of cloud, a silence heavy with glory. And Joshua called the tribes. But 7 had not yet claimed. 7 tribes still wandering in heart. They had land, but no courage. Promise, but no movement. And Joshua said, "How long will you wait to take possession of what the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" Not a rebuke, but a reminder. That inheritance left untouched is not inheritance at all. So he sent 3 men from each tribe. "Go, walk the land, write it down, describe it in 7 parts. Return to me, and I will cast lots before the Lord here at Shiloh." And they went. They passed through forests not yet cleared, streams not yet named. They sketched boundaries, not for conquest, but for calling. And they returned, with scrolls, with maps, with eyes widened. And Joshua divided the land, by lot, before the Lord, there, at Shiloh. And each tribe received, not just ground, but a place in the story. Then came the cities of refuge, 6 in total, 3 east of the Jordan, 3 west. For the one who kills by accident, to run, to plead, to live. Because even in justice, there must be mercy. And the Levites were given 48 cities, scattered, a quiet web of holiness woven through the tribes. Because worship was never meant to be central, but universal. And so it was done. The land assigned, the borders set, the people placed, and in the midst, the tent, still, steady, sacred. It did not need stone walls, because its foundation was obedience. It did not need height, because its glory was presence. And though kingdoms would rise, temples would be built, walls would someday fall, this canvas sanctuary would forever be remembered as the first place where promise rested. Because when the dividing lines were drawn, they did not only carve territory, they carved identity. And at the center of it all was worship. The lines had been drawn, the tent had been raised, the tribes settled. It should have been the end, but peace is not always stillness. And unity can fracture without warning. Because even after promises are fulfilled, the heart can still rebel, especially when the river becomes a border and suspicion flows faster than truth. The land was quiet, but not all hearts were still, because peace is fragile, and even a river can divide more than land. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had received their portion east of the Jordan, a land rich with pasture, settled early, blessed. But now, they were going home, back across the river, back to the inheritance they had asked for and been granted. Joshua called them. He looked at them with honor. "You have kept all that Moses commanded. You have obeyed me in all I asked. Now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as he promised. Return to your tents, to your land." But he gave a warning. Only, take careful heed to do the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. To love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Then Joshua blessed them, and they departed, crossing west to east, back across the Jordan. But when they reached its banks, they built a great altar, massive, visible, towering, not small, not hidden, an altar that could be seen from across the river. And word spread, fast, sharp. The other tribes heard. "Behold, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan." At once Israel gathered, at Shiloh, at the tent, ready for war, not against nations, but against brothers, because the altar looked like rebellion, like betrayal. They remembered Peor, where the plague fell. 24,000 died for turning away. They remembered Achan, how one man's sin had cost 36 lives. They would not allow another breach. And so they sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, along with 10 chiefs, one from each tribe, to confront, to question, to judge. They crossed the river and found the altar. And they said, "What is this breach of faith, that you should turn away from the Lord, building an altar in rebellion? Was the sin at Peor not enough? Is this how you repay the Lord? Do not rebel. Do not make him angry against all of us." The eastward tribes listened. They did not protest, did not grow angry. They answered, "No, the Lord God of gods, he knows. Let Israel also know. If we built this altar to turn away, may the Lord strike us. But no, this altar is not for sacrifice. It is a witness between us and you that we belong to the same Lord, so that in future days your children will not say to ours, 'You have no part in the Lord.' We feared that distance would become division, that the river would one day sever our faith. So we built this altar, not as rebellion, but as remembrance." Then Phinehas heard, and the chiefs listened, and the war was called off. Because peace is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of understanding. And the altar remained, but not for sacrifice. They called it witness, because it stood between two sides of a river, to remind them they were still one people under one God. The altar stood, not in defiance, but in devotion, not for offerings, but for memory. They named it Edad, a simple word, a single name. But it meant everything. Witness, because sometimes you don't build to burn, you build to remember. Israel returned from the brink. No swords drawn, no blood spilled, just truth spoken and heard. Because the most powerful altar is not made of stone, but of understanding. And peace settled again. But the story was not done, because memory, even when sacred, can fade, and altars, when left alone, can be forgotten. Years passed, then decades. Children grew, grandchildren too. The land was no longer new, nor the story fresh. And the altar at the river's edge stood quiet, covered in dust, surrounded by weeds. No incense, no voice, And one day a child asked, "What is this pile of stones?" And his father paused, because he wasn't sure. This was the danger, not in rebellion, but in forgetting why the witness was built, not in division, but in silence. Because every altar, every word, every moment of reconciliation needs a voice to keep it alive, a father to tell, a child to ask, a people to remember. Back when Moses crossed the wilderness, he had warned, "When you enter the land, do not forget the Lord your God, lest you say in your heart, 'My power and the strength of my hand have gotten me this wealth.' But memory is like water. It needs vessels, or it slips through." And so the tribes gathered once more, not for war, not for inheritance, but to renew. They read the law again, from beginning to end. They sang the old songs, recounted the miracles, retold the parting of the sea, the fall of Jericho, the day the sun stood still. And they spoke of the altar, of the day their unity nearly shattered, and the day truth pulled them back. They set a stone near it, smaller but marked, a second witness to the witness, because faith needs layers, just like memory. Then an elder stood and said, "As long as this altar remains, we must teach, not just the what, but the why. Not just that it stands, but what it saved us from. Because altars of witness only matter if their story is carried." And so they passed it down, father to son, mother to daughter. Not written in scrolls alone, but in voices and firesides and fading evenings where questions still rise. What is this stone? What does it mean? Why do we stand on both sides of one river but worship one God? And the answer always soft, always sacred, because we remember, because we chose to speak instead of fight, to build instead of break. And perhaps that is the true altar, not of bronze or brick, but of words kept alive. The years passed. The rivers still flowed. The altar still stood. But the man was fading. Joshua, the one who crossed the Jordan, who saw walls fall, who watched the sun stop. Now he watched time take his breath bit by bit. He gathered all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges and officers, and he stood, aged but unbent, his voice seasoned by wilderness, his eyes scarred by memory. And he said, "I am old, advanced in years, but you have seen all that the Lord your God has done for you. It was the Lord who fought for you." He reminded them of every land taken, every king conquered, every promise fulfilled. And then he warned, "Be very strong to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. Cling to the Lord your God. Do not turn aside. Do not serve other gods. Take careful heed to love the Lord your God, because if you turn away, he will no longer drive out the nations before you, and they shall be snares, traps, whips on your sides, thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land." And the people listened, their hearts stirred, their memories sharpened, because Joshua did not speak as a ruler. He spoke as a father. Then he said, "Now I am going the way of all the earth. But you know in your hearts, not one word has failed of all the good things the Lord promised. All have come to pass. Not one word has failed." And with those words, he left them, returned to his home, to the hill country of Ephraim, to rest, and soon after, to die. They buried him in the land he helped conquer, among the people he helped lead, under the sky that once stood still for his prayers. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived him. Because legacy is not just what you leave, it's who remembers. And sometimes one voice of warning echoes longer than 1,000 commands. And one altar of witness stands longer than 1,000 walls. If this part of Joshua's story has stirred something deep in you, a reverence, a question, a quiet awe, then take a moment, And like this video, subscribe if you want to journey deeper. Share this with someone who stands at their own river, trying to remember why they started. Joshua was gone. The elders faded, and time moved on. But with it, something else faded too: memory. And when memory fades, so does faith. Because a generation had arisen that knew not the wars nor the wonders. They inherited the land, but not the reverence. And the altar called witness stood silent, because the children never asked, and the fathers never told. The blazing pillar has dimmed, the altar stands alone. The elders have fallen, and the new dawn rises, quiet, unanchored. It is not the dawn that frightens, it's the silence. The children who walk past stones without seeing, the grandchildren who ignore the mark of blood. And in that forgetfulness, a wound deepens. They dwelt in cities of stone and vine. Their hands planted vineyards. Their tables groaned under harvests. Their hearts celebrated peace. Yet in their celebration, they spoke no word of the Jordan, no whisper of the sea. They did not speak of miracles, but only of monuments. The walls stood, but the story vanished. And an altar without story is a stone without soul. One evening, a young man passed by the pillar. He paused, felt a tug, but did not understand. His mother noticed. Her heart uneasy followed him. They asked, "What is that stone for?" He shrugged again, not sure. No story answered. No flame burned. Just memory left to die slowly in dust. The mother watched him walk away. She knew what was happening. A generation born free, raised in lemon groves, who could not recall what made them free. A generation who had never tasted the bitterness that sweetened their freedom. Because they never asked, and no one told. Later at his home, the mother lit a lamp, called her son closer. "Would you hear a story? Not of victory, but of mercy, of river paths, of walls that fell because they believed." He looked. She began to speak. She spoke of Joshua, of his farewell, of his warning. "Cling only to the Lord." She spoke of altars, of stones stacked in witness, of tears shed at the river, of living water that passed through them. He listened. Eyes widened, heart cracked, memory awakened. Because the story he heard was not about land, but a gift. Not about battle, but grace. And in her voice he heard the echo. The pillar still moves. The altar still lives. As long as a story is spoken, not buried. Tomorrow, they will walk to the pillar. Together, he will ask again. And she will retell. And she will mark the stone. Here we remembered again. Because remembrance is not for the past. It is for the future. It never starts with denial. It starts with delay. A story untold, a question unanswered. Just once, then twice. Then silence becomes habit. And habit becomes heritage. The people still brought offerings, still visited the tent, still wore the name Israel. But their hearts drifted. Because rituals without remembrance are just shadows. And the land still bloomed. The rain still fell. The wheat still waved. But beneath the soil, the roots loosened. Because they had forgotten why they planted. And slowly the names changed. Not openly, but subtly. Yahweh became God of our fathers. Then the God, then silence. The stories shifted. No longer about plagues and partings, but about prosperity and peace. No longer about promises, but possessions. And then the foreign gods came, not with fire, but with comfort. Not with armies, but with trade. Baal was easy. No law, no covenant. Just crops and pleasure. Ashtoreth smiled. She didn't ask for loyalty, only attention. And Dagon offered grain without gratitude. At first, they were kept outside the camp. Small idols, carved tokens. then inside homes, then on family altars, next to Yahweh, just in case. Because forgetting rarely looks like rebellion. It looks like divided love. It looks like insurance faith. Just one more God. Just one more option. But the Lord is not one among many. He is one, or nothing. And so the Lord withdrew, not in wrath, but in sorrow. He who had walked through parted waters now watched them wade into confusion. He who had thundered on Sinai now waited in silence. Because love does not force, it remembers, and waits to be remembered. And the people continued. Harvests shrank, but they blamed weather. Enemies raided, but they blamed kings. Their children wept, but they blamed luck. Never once did they blame forgetting. Until one day, there were no more elders left. No more men who remembered the river. No more women who sang of manna. Just a land and a people, and between them a silence thicker than the wilderness. And then the silence broke, not with prophecy, not with thunder, but with pain. Because when memory fades, judgment comes. Not in lightning, but in slow unraveling. The enemies grew bold. From the north, from the east, from within. Cities once peaceful were raided. Fields burned, children stolen, women wept. And the strong men hid. But the worst pain was not loss of land. It was the loss of meaning. Because when the gods don't answer, and Yahweh feels distant, to whom do you cry? They remembered just enough to fear, not enough to trust. They wept, but did not repent. They shouted, but did not return. And still God waited. Until one night, a mother beaten by grief turned to the sky. She had nothing left. No grain, no husband, no song, just breath and brokenness. And she whispered, "Where are you?" And heaven heard, because even forgotten altars can echo when the cry is real, even in silence. The covenant waits. And across the land others whispered too, in corners, in caves, in places Baal could not reach. And their cries reached upward. They didn't know the law, but they remembered the name. They didn't know the rituals, but they remembered the river. And they called, and the Lord answered, not with armies, not with fire, but with breath. He stirred the heart of a child, a woman in labor, a man plowing a field. He whispered to the ones the priests ignored. He raised deliverers from shadows. Because when the people forget, God remembers. And His mercy moves. That was the beginning of judges, of restoration, of revival. But first, a cry. One real cry in the dark that remembered just enough. They remembered just enough to cry. And God, just enough to save. But what if memory only lasts until peace returns? What if mercy becomes routine? Because the people rose, they worshipped, they fought, they won. And then they forgot again, and again, and again. Not a single fall, but a cycle. Not just brokenness, but a pattern. And into that pattern, God sent judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel, only men, and memory, and the mercy of God. But even mercy can be misused, because the people forgot again. And when they cried, God delivered again. But every rescue was followed by relapse. Not because the rescue failed, but because the heart never truly returned. This was the cycle. Israel sinned. God grew silent. Enemies rose. The people suffered. They cried out. And God sent a judge. A man, a woman, chosen not for might, but for obedience. They led. They fought. They won. Peace returned. But with peace came forgetfulness. And the cycle began again. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, each one a torch in the dark, each one a voice in the silence, each one brief. The people never changed, only the pain did. And pain, though loud, is not the same as repentance. Why did they forget so easily? Because idols are easier than intimacy. Because Baal doesn't ask for your heart, only your rituals. Because Ashtoreth doesn't speak, so you can still do what you want. But the Lord, He calls, He commands, He whispers and waits. He requires memory, devotion, trust. And the people wanted peace, but not presence, safety, but not surrender, blessing, but not obedience. So they fell, rose, fell again, like waves with no shore. And the judges, they tried, but they were men, women. Some righteous, some rash, some ruined. Gideon feared. Jephthah vowed foolishly. Samson loved wrongly. Even deliverance was flawed. Because the people didn't need rescue, they needed renewal. But still, God came. Each time, each fall, each cry. Not because they deserved, but because He remembered. Not because they changed, but because He never did. And this was the broken cycle. Not just of history, but of the heart. Every cycle leaves a scar, and Israel's scars ran deep. Because forgetting always has a price. And when the people forgot the Lord, they didn't just lose battles. They lost themselves. Their worship grew strange, mixed, contaminated. Altars of Yahweh stood next to poles of Ashtoreth. Sacrifices were offered, but not with love. Prayers were said, but not from the heart. And slowly, faith became performance. And performance became emptiness. The judges warned. But who listens when life is good again? Who hears when the enemy retreats? And so the cost rose. Tribes turned against each other. Civil war broke out. Brother killed brother. Benjaminites nearly vanished. Because when God is forgotten, even family becomes fragile. They cried again. God heard again. Sent deliverers again. But the cycles grew shorter. The peace grew thinner. And the people grew harder. Even the deliverers grew darker. Jephthah killed his daughter. Samson burned with rage. Micah made idols. Dan stole priests. This wasn't just failure. It was unraveling. And all through the land, one phrase echoed. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. But right without righteousness is ruin. And when the compass breaks, even the stars can't save you. One night, a mother sat with her son. She told him of Othniel, of Gideon, of Deborah. But he asked, "Why do we need so many saviors? Why do we keep falling?" And she said, "Because we forget. Because we love peace more than presence. Because we want blessing without obedience. And until we remember, the cost will keep rising." The boy looked to the sky and whispered, "Then what will it take to finally remember, when the cycle could sink no lower?" A cry rose, but not from a warrior, not from a prophet, not from a king. From a woman, alone, unnoticed. In the shadow of Shiloh, her name was Hannah. Her womb was empty, her heart full of sorrow, of hope, of longing. She came where few still believed, to the tabernacle, to the altar that still stood, even when the hearts around it had crumbled. She didn't bring grain or goats. She brought only tears and a vow. "If you will remember me, if you will give me a son, I will give him back to you, all the days of his life." And she wept, not for power, not for pride, but for presence. She wanted God to return, and through her, He did. Eli, the old priest, watched her, thought she was drunk, because sometimes real prayer looks too broken to be understood. But when she spoke, He heard, and He blessed her. In time, a child was born, Samuel, Not just a son, a signal that God had not left, that the cycle could break, that newness could still rise from barrenness. She kept her vow. When the boy was weaned, she brought him back to the tabernacle, to Eli, and left him. And Samuel listened when no one else would. He heard the voice of God as a child in the night. He said, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." And so began the days of the last judge. Not one who ruled with sword, but with word. Not one who delivered by might, but by truth. Samuel saw kings rise and fall. He anointed Saul, then David. He called Israel back to the voice of God, not to cycles, but to covenant. And yet it all began with one woman's quiet plea. In the middle of a broken cycle, she broke the silence. Perhaps that's all it takes. Not a nation, not an army. Just one soul who remembers. One voice who cries sincerely. One prayer that heaven hears. If this story stirred something in you, a longing to listen again, a memory of when you once prayed that way, then let this moment be your altar. Like if you've ever prayed from emptiness. Comment what Hannah's cry reminds you of. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories that turn barrenness into blessing. The judge had spoken, and Israel listened, but only for a time, because the people no longer wanted a voice. They wanted a throne. They said to Samuel, "Give us a king." Like the nations, they had the ark, they had the altar, they had the word, but they wanted a crown, not a covenant. And so began the search for sovereignty and the rise of a king. The people gathered, not in worship, but in worry. They came to Samuel, the judge, the prophet, the voice of God. And they said, "You are old, your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king, to judge us, to lead us, like all the other nations." And Samuel was grieved. Not because they asked for structure, but because they asked to look like the world. He prayed. And the Lord said, "They have not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them. From the day I brought them up from Egypt to this day, they have forsaken me, yet still." He told Samuel, "Give them a king, but warn them first." So Samuel stood, and he spoke. "You want a king? He will take your sons for his chariots, his army, his fields. He will take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, bakers. He will take your vineyards, your grain, your servants. And you will cry out because of the king you chose. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." Still, the people refused to listen. They shouted, "We want a king, that we may be like the nations, that our king may go out before us and fight our battles." So Samuel prayed again, and the Lord said, "Give them a king," not because they needed one, but because they insisted. Not as a blessing, but as a lesson. Because sometimes God gives not what we ask in wisdom, but what we demand in pride. And so the search began, not for a servant, but for a king. He was tall, taller than any man in Israel. From shoulder upward, he stood above them all. His name was Saul, a Benjamite, from the smallest tribe, of modest means, but chosen. He did not seek the crown. He sought donkeys. His father's animals had gone missing, and Saul wandered the hill country looking. But God was leading, not to animals, but to anointing. A servant said, "There's a man of God nearby. Perhaps he can tell us where to go." So they came to Samuel. And the Lord said, "Here is the man. He shall rule my people." Samuel took oil, poured it on Saul's head, and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people?" Then Samuel gave signs, and all came true. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul, and he prophesied. But when it came time to crown him, Saul hid among the baggage. They found him, pulled him out, stood him tall before the people. And Samuel said, "Do you see whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people." And they shouted, "Long live the king!" But Saul's heart was trembling. He did not hunger for power, not yet. He was unsure, hesitant, shy. And that was not all bad. For humility at the start can guard a throne. Then came the first test. Nahash the Ammonite besieged Jabesh-Gilead, threatened to gouge out every right eye, to bring shame on Israel. The people cried, and Saul heard, and the Spirit of God rushed upon him again. He gathered the men, led the charge, struck the Ammonites until none remained, and all Israel rejoiced. They said, "Let us kill the ones who doubted Saul." But Saul said, "No, not a man shall die today, for the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." It was his finest hour, not just in war, but in mercy, because power is not proved in battle, but in how you treat your brothers after the victory. And Samuel called the people again to Gilgal. There they renewed the kingdom. They made Saul king before the Lord, and they sacrificed peace offerings, and all Israel rejoiced greatly. Saul had begun with humility, but power is not a crown. It is a test, and with time, the cracks began to show. Another war rose. Philistines, thousands of chariots, soldiers like sand. Israel trembled. So did Saul. He waited for Samuel 7 days, but the prophet delayed. The men began to scatter. Fear crept in, and Saul acted. He offered the sacrifice, but he was no priest. And as the fire burned, Samuel arrived. "What have you done?" Saul replied. "The people were scattering. You did not come. The Philistines were near, so I forced myself and offered the sacrifice." Samuel looked, and his heart sank. "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord. Your kingdom shall not continue." It was the first break, not of law, but of trust. Because obedience is not just about doing. It's about waiting. It's about surrender. Later, another test came. Amalek, a nation cursed long ago for attacking the weak. The Lord said, "Strike them, leave nothing." Saul obeyed, halfway. He spared the king, kept the best livestock. Then he built a monument to himself. Samuel arrived, and Saul said, "Blessed be you to the Lord. I have performed the command of the Lord." But Samuel asked, "Then what is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of oxen?" Saul stammered. The people spared the best to sacrifice to the Lord. And Samuel said, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings as in obeying his voice? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, to listen than the fat of rams. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you from being king." Saul bowed, but not in repentance, only regret. He clung to the robe, but not to God. He asked Samuel to stay, so the people would still honor him. Even in rejection, he feared image more than intimacy. And Samuel turned to go, but Saul grabbed his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said, "The Lord has torn the kingdom from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, better than you." Saul fell to the ground, not from grief for God, but fear of being forgotten. The king who once hid in baggage now built statues to himself. The king who once spared rebels now sought to kill prophets. Because power unsubmitted always turns inward. But God had already chosen another, a boy, in a field, with a harp, a heart after God. And Saul's days began to dim, even as his crown still gleamed. The crown still rested on Saul's head, but the favor had moved. To a field, to a boy, to a song. Because when kings forget God, God finds a shepherd. And in Bethlehem under stars a young hand strummed a harp, and heaven leaned in. He was the youngest, forgotten, left with sheep, while his brothers stood before Samuel. David was in the fields, with a sling and a song. No crown, no sword, just praise. Because greatness often begins where no one looks. The Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at appearance or height of stature. Man looks at the outward, but the Lord looks at the heart." So Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" And Jesse said, "There remains the youngest. He is keeping the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit until he comes." And when David entered, the Spirit stirred. He was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a heart aflame. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." Oil poured over his head, down his cheeks, into the soil. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. But David returned to the field, to sheep, to solitude, to songs, because being chosen is not the same as being crowned. He sang while no one listened. He wrote psalms with no audience, but heaven heard, because praise is never wasted. A lion came. David fought. A bear came. David struck. In secret he trained. In silence he grew. Not in palace, but in pasture. Meanwhile, Saul trembled. The Spirit had left him. An evil spirit tormented him. His counselors said, "Let us find a man who can play skillfully. Music will soothe you." And so David was brought in to play, not with sword, but with strings. And when he played, Saul's soul found rest, even when Saul did not know why. Because when God anoints, his presence travels in even the smallest notes. And David played and served, in the shadow of a king whose crown he would one day wear. But for now, he sang. The valley was still, but fear filled the air. Two armies stood on opposite hills, paralyzed by one voice. Goliath, a giant from Gath, 9 feet tall, armor like bronze mountains, a sword like thunder. He mocked, shouted, dared. "Send me a man. Let him fight me. If he wins, we serve you. But if I win, you serve us." And Israel was silent. Even Saul, the tallest in the land, did not move. 40 days, twice each day. The challenge rang, and fear grew roots. Then David came, not as a warrior, but a delivery boy. Bread, cheese, sent by his father. But David heard what others feared. He saw what others tolerated. He asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His brothers mocked him. "You're just proud. You came to watch the battle." But David replied, "Is there not a cause?" Word reached Saul, and David stood before the king. "Let no man's heart fail. Your servant will fight him." Saul looked. "You are a boy. He's been a warrior since youth." But David said, "I have kept my father's sheep. When the lion came, I struck it. When the bear came, I grabbed its jaw. The Lord who delivered me then will deliver me now." So Saul said, "Go, and the Lord be with you." David took no sword, no armor, only a sling and 5 smooth stones. And he ran toward the giant. Goliath laughed. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" But David said, "You come with sword and spear. I come in the name of the Lord of hosts, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and all the earth shall know there is a God in Israel." Then David ran, slung his stone, and the giant fell, face down, into the dust. One stone, from one heart after God. Israel roared, the Philistines fled, and David stood holding the sword of the man who mocked God. He had no crown, no title, just obedience and courage, and a heart God could trust. The boy became a hero. Songs rose. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And with every chorus, Saul's heart cracked, not from joy, but from jealousy. Because the people loved David, his courage, his humility, his favor with God. And Saul feared him more than Goliath, more than armies. Because fear is fiercest when it faces favor it cannot control. David played his harp as before, the same notes, the same peace. But Saul's eyes burned, and one day he threw the spear, not once, but twice, and David escaped. The one who brought him rest now brought him rage. The king he served became the shadow he fled. Yet David never lifted a hand, never took the throne by force. He ran to caves, to wilderness, to exile. But even in flight, he wrote psalms. He wept, he worshipped. Because crowns are not won by anger. They are received in patience. Twice David could have killed Saul, in the cave, in the camp. But he whispered, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." Because obedience still matters even when the throne is near. And the people watched. They saw a man who would not fight his way to power, but wait his way to purpose. And the Lord watched too, and smiled. What about you? Have you ever walked with faith next to someone who wanted to destroy you? Have you ever waited while others shouted, like if David's restraint challenged something in you? Comment a moment when you had to choose peace over proving yourself. Subscribe to hear more stories where the hardest victories happen not on battlefields, but in the heart. Saul had fallen by his own sword, on his own battlefield. And David wept, not for the throne, but for the man who once sang with him, for the friend who once believed in him, for the king he never tried to replace. Because before the crown was placed on his head, it had been carved into his soul, by waiting, by wounds, by worship. And now, the covenant would rise, and the crown would finally rest. The field was silent, blood had dried, the bodies lay still. Saul was dead, Jonathan was gone, and David wept, not as a conqueror, not as a king, but as a friend, as a son, as a servant who had never stopped hoping. He tore his clothes, fell to the ground, and sang a song of sorrow, a lament for the fallen. How the mighty have fallen. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. In life and in death, they were not divided. He mourned the man who hunted him. He honored the one who once threw a spear. Because David knew, glory is not revenge, it is reverence, even for the broken, especially for the broken. Then the people came, tribes, elders, and they said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh." The Lord said, "You shall shepherd my people. Be our king." And David accepted, not with parade, but with prayer. He was 30 years old, and the crown rested on a heart long prepared. He reigned. He united tribes, took Jerusalem, brought the ark home. He danced before the Lord. He wrote psalms, led armies, bowed often, because leadership to him was worship. He remembered the sheep, the cave, the harp, the promise, and now the covenant. The Lord said, "I took you from the pasture, from following sheep, to be prince over my people, and I will make for you a house. Your throne will be established forever." It was not just a kingship, it was a legacy, not just for David, but for one yet to come, one who would also be born in Bethlehem. Shepherd hearts, write truth in tears, and one day wear a crown of thorns. But for now, David ruled, with justice, with song, with memory, because some crowns are not made of gold. They are made of fire, and only waiting can shape them. The king had everything: peace, power, praise. But the heart is never finished. And sometimes the greatest battles are not on the battlefield, but on the rooftop. It was spring, when kings go out to war, but David stayed behind, and from his rooftop he saw her, Bathsheba, beautiful, bathing. He inquired, he summoned, he took. She was another man's wife. But power doesn't ask permission when desire speaks. She returned with news. I am with child. And the king began to hide. He called her husband Uriah, tried to mask the truth. But Uriah was too loyal, too righteous. So David sent a letter to the front lines. Place him where the battle is fiercest. Then draw back. And Uriah died. David married Bathsheba. The kingdom moved on, but God did not forget. He sent Nathan. The prophet told a story of a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. David burned with anger. That man must die. Nathan said, "You are the man." And silence fell. David could have denied, blamed, killed the prophet. But he said, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has put away your sin, but the child shall die." And David wept, fasted, lay on the ground for 7 days, but the child died. And David rose, washed, worshipped. Because forgiveness does not erase consequences, but it restores relationship. Later, Bathsheba bore another son. They named him Solomon. And the Lord loved him, because grace is never far from ashes. David never forgot. He wrote, "Have mercy on me, O God. Create in me a clean heart. Restore to me the joy of your salvation." Even the man after God's heart stumbled, but he fell toward mercy. He ran toward grace, because the covenant was not with perfect men, but with contrite hearts. David grew old. His hands, once strong for battle, now shook. His voice, once loud in song, now softened to prayer. But his heart remained awake. He looked back at giants slain, at caves once called home, at rooftops where he fell, at temples never built. He saw joy and regret, glory and grace. Because legacy is never just triumph. It is memory, wrestled with and given to God. He called Solomon and said, "Be strong, show yourself a man. Keep the commands of the Lord. Walk in his ways, and he will establish your kingdom." Then he gave plans for the temple, a house of cedar and gold, but built for presence. David would not build it, but he laid the foundation in song, in tears, in promise. Then he died, full of days, full of worship. And the throne passed on, but the story did not end. Because from David's line would come another, not with sword, but with a cross, not with armies, but with angels, not with palace, but with manger. Jesus, the Son of David, the fulfillment of the covenant, the King of Kings, the one who did not fail, who bore no guilt, but took on ours. He healed the broken cycle. He kept the law. He sang a new song, and his throne has no end. So when you read of David, you are reading your own beginning, of failure forgiven, of battles faced, of grace that runs deeper than shame. If this story touched something in your soul, like as a quiet yes, comment what moment in David's life mirrored your own. Subscribe if you believe that God still writes stories from broken hearts. And remember, your crown is not of gold, it is of fire, and he is faithful to finish what he began. May the Lord bless you, with a heart that remembers, with a soul that waits, and with strength to walk faithfully even when the path is slow. May you find him not only in triumph, but in tears, in silence, in song. And may your life become a psalm, sung back to heaven with every breath.